In less than 24 hours, the carefully constructed illusion of Queen Camilla's absolute supremacy over the British royal family was quietly and ruthlessly dismantled on the ancient cobblestones of Windsor Castle. It did not happen with a chaotic public dispute in the drawing rooms, or a messy, undignified leak to the tabloid press, but with a raised, white-gloved hand from a sovereign guard and a quietly invoked ancient law that forced her to literally step aside. What Queen Camilla just realised behind closed doors is that while a marriage certificate and a crown might grant you the highest seat at a state banquet, true institutional power is forged in strict heraldic law, unbroken bloodlines, and the silent, unyielding control of historical protocol. Over the next few minutes, we are going to unpack the highly opportunistic, visually aggressive power grab she recently attempted ahead of the Order of the Garter service, the oldest and most prestigious chivalric ceremony in the nation. We will expose how a secret bureaucratic mandate designed to visually demote Princess Anne and Prince William inadvertently triggered a freezing institutional retaliation engineered by the true guardians of the crown. By the end of this breakdown, you will understand the devastating realization currently paralyzing the Queen, that despite wearing the heavy velvet robes and sitting on the highest throne in the land, she commands absolutely no true authority over the centuries-old architecture of the monarchy. To understand why this specific internal clash reached a boiling point at Windsor Castle, we must first step back and recognize the staggering 30-year manipulation that brought Camilla to this pinnacle of the British social hierarchy. For 3 decades, she played the longest, most meticulous game of reputational rehabilitation in modern history. She survived the bitter public fallout of the 1990s, systematically worked to soften the global memory of her role in Princess Diana's tragedy, and patiently replaced the old institutional guards with her own staunch loyalists. Camilla knew that to survive and ultimately conquer the firm, she had to adopt the camouflage of high aristocracy. When King Charles officially appointed her as a Royal Lady of the Order of the Garter, and subsequently when she was crowned Queen, dropping the restrictive consort caveat entirely, she believed she had finally won the ultimate prize. The Order of the Garter is not merely a ceremonial club. It is the absolute apex of the British honour system, a nearly 700-year-old institution limited to the sovereign, the Prince of Wales, and a highly exclusive group of knights and ladies. For Camilla, donning the plumed hat and the dark blue velvet mantle was the forensic evidence of her total victory. She operated under the fundamental belief that because she held the unwavering devotion of King Charles, she had successfully conquered not just his heart, but the historical hierarchy itself. She felt entirely untouchable, assuming that the sprawling palace bureaucracy and the ancient orders of the land would naturally bend to her personal public relations agenda. But the fatal flaw in Camilla's architecture of power is a fundamental, almost arrogant misunderstanding of aristocratic tradition. She operates under the belief that her acquired title makes her the absolute superior to the born bloodline. That dangerous illusion of absolute power became a battlefield just days ago, during the intense preparations for the annual Garter Day procession. To the outside world, the Garter procession is a flawless display of sovereign unity, a highly visible platform for the royal family to project stability as they march through the grounds of Windsor Castle down to St. George's Chapel. Behind the scenes, however, during a period of acute institutional vulnerability, Camilla's private office chose this exact moment to execute an act of silent institutional erasure, paralyzed by a growing fear that her public relevance was fading compared to the undeniable global magnetism of the Prince and Princess of Wales. Camilla's team issued a highly sophisticated secret protocol directive to the Royal Logistics Department. What appears to be true, according to internal palace leaks, is that her office quietly altered the heraldic procession manifests. Camilla's team attempted to rewrite the meticulous marching order, demanding that the Queen and her heavily expanded personal entourage of aides ladies in waiting and non-royal companions be positioned at the absolute front of the royal column, deliberately forcing Princess Anne and Prince William to walk behind her staff. This was not a simple logistical error or a harmless request for better camera angles. It was a calculated, aggressive attempt to monopolize the global spotlight and visually cement her position as the supreme matriarch of the firm. By forcing the Princess Royal and the heir apparent to trail behind her non-royal employees, she was attempting to establish a devastating visual hierarchy for the world's media. She She wanted to project that the House of Windsor is now entirely subordinate to the House of Parker Bowles. She assumed she could quietly push these protocol updates through the palace bureaucracy, firmly believing that no official would dare question the logistical demands of the king's wife ahead of his favourite ceremony. She severely underestimated the cold forensic vigilance of the palace's true guardians. The discovery of this secret structural coup did not happen through an explosive family confrontation, but through a routine audit of the ceremonial blueprints by the Garter King of Arms and the central administrative officers. When the anomalous protocol requests from Camilla's office reached Princess Anne, the reality was immediate and chilling. The Princess Royal possesses the fierce, unyielding institutional memory of the crown. She does not care about tabloid gossip or public relations spin, but she cares deeply about the dignity and survival of the monarchy. When Anne reviewed the altered procession manifest, she recognised it instantly as a parasitic encroachment upon the sovereign brand. She took the paperwork directly to Prince William, the future king, who has spent the last year quietly tightening his grip on every administrative lever available to him. Together, they saw forensic proof of an unchecked liability threatening to degrade the centuries-old prestige of the crown into a cheap display of acquired ego. The retaliation from the future king and the Princess Royal was executed with a cold, ruthless legality that used the very weight of ancient institutional protocol as a weapon. Prince William and Princess Anne did not call the king to complain, nor did they engage in a messy, undignified shouting match with Camilla in the drawing rooms of Windsor. They used the silent execution of revenge, operating in total alignment with the Garter King of Arms. William quietly activated a strict binding internal directive rooted in ancient heraldic law. This internal legal mechanism explicitly clarified that the order of the Sai, Garter procession, is governed by the strict rules of precedence and bloodline, not by the personal preferences of the monarch's spouse. The directive permanently mandated that the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal must take their rightful historical positions, immediately flanking the sovereign, completely bypassing any acquired titles or non-royal entourages. The execution of this silent retaliation was breathtaking in its subtlety, resulting in an absolute visual and psychological humiliation for the Queen. On the morning of Garter Day, as the royal family gathered in the state apartments of Windsor Castle, donning their velvet robes and plumed hats, Camilla's heavily expanded entourage prepared to lead the procession out into the sunlight. They expected to walk out as the undisputed conquerors of the institution. Instead, they hit an invisible, impenetrable wall of royal protocol. As they approached the heavy oak doors leading out to the public grounds, the sovereign guards and the heraldic officers, operating under direct binding orders from the Prince of Wales and the ancient codes of chivalry, politely but firmly halted Camilla's column. Without a single word spoken in anger, a white-gloved hand was raised. The officers informed the Queen's staff that their procession order had been corrected under Heraldic Law. In a display of freezing aristocratic restraint, the guards physically directed Camilla and her aides to step aside. They were forced to stand in the shadows of the archway, waiting as Prince William and Princess Anne swept past them in a flurry of blue velvet, taking their rightful uncontested places at the absolute front of the bloodline. The visual humiliation for Camilla was absolute. What looked like a routine, ceremonial adjustment was actually a total dismantling of her social empire. She had to stand on the ancient cobblestones of Windsor Castle, maintaining her pristine aristocratic facade for the flashing cameras just outside the gates, while secretly knowing she had been literally pushed aside by the true royals. She realized in a wave of cold, suffocating panic that her administrative trick had not only failed, but it had permanently exposed her terrifying vulnerability. Stripped of her illusion of supreme control, administratively walled off by her stepson and sister-in-law, and publicly disciplined without a single word being spoken, she knew the trap had snapped shut. She was forced to confront the reality that she is merely a temporary occupant in an institution governed by laws she cannot rewrite. Terrified by the sudden collapse of her authority, Camilla retreated to the one remaining card she had left to play. Following the ceremony, she went directly to King Charles. She presented the corrected procession manifests and the humiliating reality of her sidelined entourage, demanding that he use his supreme sovereign power to crush William's administrative blockade. She demanded that the king fire the heraldic officers, officially reprimand the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal, and aggressively enforce her absolute authority as queen over all historical protocols. The entire future of the internal royal hierarchy hung in the heavy, suffocating silence of the king's private study, as the Queen stood waiting for her husband to deliver her salvation. When Queen Camilla stood in the quiet sanctuary of the King's study, demanding that Charles use the absolute power of the sovereign to override heraldic law. Fire the ceremonial officers and crush Prince William's administrative blockade, she expected an immediate explosive decree. For 30 years, Charles had been her ultimate shield. He had fought his mother, the late Queen Elizabeth, his political advisors, the British press, and his own children, to force Camilla's acceptance into the royal fold. He had spent decades burning through his own political capital to protect her from the consequences of their shared history. Camilla fully expected that in this moment of acute visual humiliation at Windsor Castle, Charles would summon the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal and deliver a crushing reprimand. She expected the king to remind his family that Camilla was the Queen, and that her staff and her entourage must be granted absolute precedence over the ancient codes of chivalry. But she encountered something far more terrifying than anger. She encountered a devastating silence. What appears to be true, according to those familiar with the internal dynamics of the king's household, is that Charles simply refused to intervene. He did not yell. He did not defend his wife's aggressive attempt to hijack the Garter procession. He looked at the corrected heraldic manifest. He absorbed the reality of his sister and his son invoking centuries-old law. He sat in the suffocating quiet of his study and he did absolutely nothing. This was the psychological climax of Camilla's decades-long campaign for total institutional supremacy. And it ended not with a grand declaration, but with a freezing realization. Charles is no longer the rebel Prince of Wales fighting for his mistreated lover. He is the king. And as the monarch, facing his own profound vulnerabilities and the fragile state of his reign, his primary overriding duty is the preservation of the crown's historical integrity. Charles knows with forensic clarity that the Order of the Garter is not a modern public relations exercise. It is the absolute foundation of British sovereign mystique. To attempt to use his emotional weight to override a 700-year-old chivalric code, simply to appease his wife's ego and elevate her non-royal staff, would be an act of institutional suicide. To publicly or privately dismantle William and Anne's invocation of heraldic law would signal a chaotic, degraded monarchy that allows the king's wife to cannibalize the sacred traditions of the state. In that singular moment of silence, Charles chose the legal and historical survival of the institution over the vanity of his wife. Camilla learned the hardest lesson of her royal life. The king will no longer save her from the guardians of the bloodline. To understand why this heraldic lockout is so permanently catastrophic for Camilla, we must examine the staggering reality hiding behind her velvet robes. The public sees a queen marching through the grounds of Windsor Castle in the plumed hat of the Garter, projecting the image of an untouchable sovereign matriarch. They assume that because she wears the insignia, she owns the history. But behind closed doors, the forensic architecture of the firm tells a remarkably different story. Camilla possesses absolutely no historical or blood claim to the institution she is attempting to command. Her secret maneuvering to rewrite the procession order was never just about wanting a better camera angle for her aides. It was a frantic, calculated attempt to artificially manufacture a sense of absolute historical supremacy before her ultimate protector is gone. She knows that without King Charles, she instantly becomes a dowager queen with zero biological connection to the ancient orders of the land, entirely dependent on the very stepson she just tried to physically sideline. That detail matters immensely because it exposes the ultimate leverage in this silent war. Prince William is not just the heir apparent, he is the future sovereign of the Order of the Garter. Princess Anne is not just the king's sister, she is the uncompromising enforcer of the bloodline's dignity. They possess the constitutional and historical authority that Camilla can only ever borrow. She cannot grant her staff a place in the history books or rewrite a single line of chivalric code without colliding with the massive, unyielding wall of the joint administrative and heraldic offices. William and Anne hold the keys to the kingdom's history, and they have legally, quietly, and permanently locked her out of the archives. The realization that she is now entirely at the mercy of the next generations, strict adherence to protocol, is a psychological prison of her own making. The illusion of absolute historical control was instantly replaced by the stark, terrifying reality of her temporary status. She is merely an acquired occupant in an empire built by the ancestors of the people she tried to push aside. As Camilla's shadow empire was quietly dismantled at the heavy oak doors of Windsor, the visual landscape of the monarchy began to immediately reflect the new order. This is where the silent execution of revenge translates into undeniable public reality. In the days following this internal crisis, viewers and royal analysts noticed a profound, subtle shift in how protocol is being weaponized across all state functions. The consequences of this heraldic correction extend far beyond a single parade. There has been a noticeable rigid change in how precedence is managed. The privilege of utilizing royal events to elevate the Parker Bowl's presence has been quietly but firmly restricted. Routed through a grueling approval process managed entirely by William's constitutional advisors. Amidst this silent institutional reckoning, the presence of the Princess of Wales emerged as the ultimate undeniable contrast. Catherine did not need to issue a statement condemning Camilla's attempted procession coup, and she did not need to negotiate with heraldic officers for a prominent spot. She simply allowed the massive quiet weight of her husband's absolute authority to protect her rightful place. During the public displays of the Garter service, Catherine emerged as a portrait of freezing aristocratic restraint. She did not need to manufacture dominance because she understands the fundamental difference between acquired vanity and genuine generational duty. She demonstrated that uncomplaining sacrifice, fierce protection of the bloodline, and steadfast loyalty to the crown will always outmaneuver the unchecked ambition of outsiders. She does not need to fight Camilla for dominance because her husband has already engineered the ultimate checkmate. The boundary has been drawn in permanent historical ink. The true royals remain at the front of the column protecting the ancient codes, and the temporary guests are managed with raised white gloves and polite instructions to step aside. This brings us to the deeper tragic meaning of this entire crisis. Camilla spent 30 years carefully clawing her way to the very top of the British social hierarchy. She endured intense public hatred, she orchestrated a masterful public relations rehabilitation, and she successfully convinced Charles to place the highest crown in the land upon her head. She believed that reaching the summit meant she would finally be safe, that she could secure her place in history and physically stand above the very family she married into. But what this story encoding the cobblestones of Windsor Castle proves is that the crown on Camilla's head cannot rewrite the past. She is surrounded by the trappings of unimaginable historical prestige, yet she is paralyzed by the reality that she cannot bend the institution to her will. The ultimate tragedy for Camilla is that she played a 30-year game of chess, sacrificing everything for the ultimate title only to realize too late that the Prince of Wales and the Princess Royal dictate the rules of the board. Camilla is now trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. Sitting next to a king who will no longer defend her power, grabs walled off from the true historical authority of the monarchy, and forced to live under the absolute unyielding protocols of the next generation. The era of the Shadow Queen attempting to rewrite the ancient heritage of the monarchy is effectively over. If you want to continue unpacking the silent warfare, the hidden administrative maneuvers, and the psychological power dynamics of the modern British monarchy, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We will continue to pull back the curtain on the illusions of power, one subtle detail at a time. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next analysis.